Chapter 1. The Glittering Soirée. The grand ballroom of Harrington Hall shimmered under the glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across the polished parquet floor. It was the evening of October 12, 1935, and London's elite had gathered at the invitation of Lady Evelyn Harrington, a widow of considerable wealth and impeccable taste. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes, the murmur of cultured voices, and the soft strains of a string quartet tucked discreetly in the corner. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his tailored black suit, stood near a marble pillar, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of a watchmaker. His waxed moustache twitched slightly as he sipped his tisane, a deliberate choice amidst the sea of sparkling wine. Lady Harrington, resplendent in a sapphire gown, held court near the centre of the room. Around her wrist gleamed the evening's true star, a turquoise bracelet, its stones cut into perfect ovals and set in intricate gold filigree. The jewel had been the talk of the season, rumoured to have been crafted for an Egyptian princess centuries ago. Its vibrant hue caught the light, drawing gasps and whispers from the guests. Poirot, ever observant, noted the way Lady Harrington touched the bracelet absent-mindedly, as if reassuring herself of its presence. "Mon ami," said Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend, approaching with a glass of brandy in hand. "You seem more interested in that bauble than in the conversation. Surely you're not here to admire jewellery." Hastings's tone was teasing, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "The bracelet, Hastings, is not merely a bauble. It is a story, a history, a magnet for human desires. And where there is desire, there is always possibility." His voice was soft, but his words carried weight, as if he sensed the undercurrents beneath the evening's glamour. The guest list was a tapestry of wealth and influence. There was Miss Clara Winthrop, Lady Harrington's niece, a pale young woman with sharp eyes and a brittle smile, who hovered near her aunt with a mixture of deference and resentment. Poirot noted her frequent glances at the bracelet, her fingers tightening around her glass. Across the room, Mr. Julian Vance, a suave art dealer with a reputation for acquiring rare antiquities, engaged in animated conversation with a group of admirers. His charm was effortless, but Poirot's keen gaze caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes whenever he looked toward Lady Harrington. Then there was Count Victor Rostov, a Russian diplomat with a shadowy past, whose impeccable manners did little to mask the intensity of his presence. He stood apart, observing the room with the detachment of a chess master studying a board. Poirot's interest lingered on him longest, sensing a man accustomed to secrets. Other guests included Sir Reginald Blake, a retired banker with a penchant for gambling, and Mrs. Lavinia Trent, a society matron whose gossip was as sharp as her diamond earrings. As the evening progressed, the quartet struck up a waltz, and couples took to the floor. Poirot declined an invitation to dance, preferring to remain at his vantage point. He noticed Clara slip away from her aunt's side. Her face flushed as she whispered something to a young man in a corner, Mr. Peter Langley, a journalist with a knack for scandal. Their exchange was brief but heated, and Poirot filed it away in his mental ledger. Dinner was announced, and the guests moved to the dining hall, a cavernous space adorned with tapestries and silver candelabras. Lady Harrington sat at the head of the table, the turquoise bracelet catching the candlelight as she gestured animatedly. Poirot, seated between Mrs. Trent and Sir Reginald, listened politely to their chatter while cataloguing every detail. The way Clara avoided her aunt's gaze, The way Vance's fingers twitched when the bracelet was mentioned. The way Count Rostov's eyes narrowed at a seemingly innocuous remark about Egypt. The conversation turned to the bracelet's origins. "It's said to have belonged to an Egyptian princess," Lady Harrington declared, her voice carrying a note of pride. "A gift from a pharaoh, passed down through centuries. I acquired it at an auction in Cairo last year, though not without some complications." She laughed lightly, but Poirot detected a hint of unease. "Complications, my lady?" Vance inquired, his tone smooth as silk. "Surely a treasure like that comes with a story." "Oh, nothing too dramatic," Lady Harrington replied, though her smile faltered. "Just a few eager bidders, and, well, some nonsense about a curse. Superstition, of course." "A curse?" Mrs. Trent leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Do tell, Evelyn." Lady Harrington hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. "Just old tales. Something about misfortune befalling those who wear it without the blessing of the gods. Utter nonsense, but it does add to the bracelet's mystique, don't you think?" The table murmured in agreement, but Poirot's mind was racing. A cursed jewel, a room full of ambitious and envious guests, and an undercurrent of tension. He could feel the threads of a mystery beginning to weave together. He glanced at Hastings, who was blissfully unaware, engrossed in his roast pheasant. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon soufflé, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small commotion at the far end of the table. Clara had spilled her wine, her hands trembling as she dabbed at the stain on her dress. "I'm fine, really," she insisted, but her voice was tight. Poirot noted Peter Langley's quick move to assist her, and the way Count Rostov watched the scene with an unreadable expression. The evening drew to a close, with coffee in the drawing-room. Lady Harrington, ever the gracious hostess, invited guests to admire the bracelet up close. A small crowd gathered, and Poirot positioned himself to observe. He saw Clara's lips tighten as Vance complimented the jewel's craftsmanship, and he caught the brief, intense look exchanged between Sir Reginald and Mrs. Trent. Count Rostov, meanwhile, lingered on the fringes, his face a mask of polite disinterest. As the guests began to depart, Poirot approached Lady Harrington. "A most splendid evening, madame," he said, bowing slightly. "The bracelet! It is truly remarkable you wear it with such grace." She beamed. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. It's a treasure, isn't it? I feel quite attached to it already." "Indeed," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. "But treasures, they attract attention, no? You will take care, I trust." Her laughter was light, but Poirot's words lingered in his own mind. As he and Hastings stepped into the cool night air, the detective's thoughts were already turning. The bracelet was more than a jewel. It was a beacon, drawing greed, envy, and perhaps something darker. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was ready to unravel the mystery that was surely to come. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Jewel. The morning after the grand soirée at Harrington Hall broke with a crisp autumn chill, the kind that sharpened the senses and made the sprawling estate seem both majestic and foreboding. Hercule Poirot stood in the morning room, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the thick Persian rug, as Lady Evelyn Harrington paced before the tall windows. Her face, usually composed and radiant, was now etched with distress. The turquoise bracelet, the centerpiece of last night's revelry, was gone, stolen some time between the final toast and the dawn. "It's unthinkable, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Harrington exclaimed, wringing her hands. "I placed it in my jewellery box in my bedroom before retiring, as I always do. The box was locked, the room secure. Yet this morning it was empty." Her sapphire eyes glistened with unshed tears, though Poirot suspected a mix of indignation and fear beneath her grief. Captain Hastings, standing near a mahogany sideboard, looked equally perturbed. "A thief among the guests, Poirot. It's brazen, even for a jewel of that value." His honest face creased with concern, but Poirot noted his friend's tendency to leap to conclusions. "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said, raising a hand. "The facts, they must be assembled before the theories. Let us begin at the beginning." His voice was calm, but his dark eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a predator sensing prey. The morning room, with its pale green walls and gilt-framed portraits, was now a hub of nervous energy. The household staff hovered at the edges, summoned by Lady Harrington's frantic orders. Poirot's gaze swept over them. The butler, Mr. Grayson, a stoic man in his 50s, the young maid, Ellen, whose hands trembled as she adjusted her cap, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, whose stern demeanour barely masked her unease. Each, Poirot knew, could hold a piece of the puzzle. Lady Harrington led Poirot and Hastings to her bedroom on the second floor, a sumptuous space adorned with silk drapes and a four-poster bed. The jewellery box, an elegant rosewood case inlaid with mother-of-pearl, sat on a vanity table. Poirot examined it closely, noting the absence of scratches or damage around the lock. "The thief, he was skilled," Poirot murmured. "No force was used. This suggests either a key or a master of locks." "But the only key is mine," Lady Harrington protested, producing a small silver key from her pocket. "I keep it with me always." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his fingers brushing the box's smooth surface. "And the room, madame? It was locked when you retired?" "Yes, and the windows were fastened. I checked myself." Her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the slight flush in her cheeks, a sign of agitation, or perhaps something more. He turned to the windows, their heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal the gardens below. The sashes were indeed secure, with no signs of tampering. Yet Poirot's mind churned. A locked room, a skilled thief, and a house full of guests with motives as varied as their titles. The challenge was exhilarating. Downstairs, the guests from the previous night had been asked to remain, a request enforced by the arrival of Chief Inspector Japp, who had been summoned at Lady Harrington's insistence. The drawing-room, where the guests now gathered, crackled with tension. Clara Winthrop sat rigidly on a settee, her pale hands clasped tightly in her lap. Julian Vance leaned against a bookcase, his casual posture belied by the sharp glance he cast around the room. Count Victor Rostov stood by the fireplace, his expression impassive, while Sir Reginald Blake and Mrs. Lavinia Trent whispered in a corner, their faces grim. Peter Langley, the journalist, scribbled notes in a small pad, his eyes darting between the others. Japp, his bowler hat in hand, addressed the group. "Right then. A valuable bracelet's gone missing, and no one's leaving until we get to the bottom of it. Monsieur Poirot's kindly offered to assist, and I'll be taking statements. Let's have no nonsense." Poirot, standing near the grand piano, raised a hand for silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed, but it is not merely a theft. It is a challenge to the order of things. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Where were you between midnight and dawn?" The question hung in the air, and Poirot watched the reactions closely. Clara's eyes flickered toward Peter Langley, who shifted uncomfortably. Vance's smile was a touch too smooth, while Count Rostov's gaze remained steady, almost defiant. Sir Reginald cleared his throat, muttering about a late-night cigar in the library, and Mrs. Trent claimed she'd retired early with a headache. Poirot began with Clara. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, you were seen speaking with Monsieur Langlais last evening. A most animated conversation, non?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "It was nothing, just family matters. I went to bed shortly after." Her voice was clipped, and Poirot noted the way her fingers twisted her handkerchief. "And you, Monsieur Langlais?" Poirot turned to the journalist, whose pen paused mid-stroke. "I was up late, writing in my room," Langlais said quickly. "Didn't leave until breakfast." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Writing, you say? A most dedicated profession. And yet, the corridor to your room passes near Madame Harrington's. You saw nothing unusual?" Langlais shook his head, but Poirot caught the brief tightening of his jaw. The little grey cells were at work, cataloguing each gesture, each evasion. Next, Poirot approached Julian Vance. "Monsieur Vance, your interest in the bracelet last night was evident. An expert in antiquities, you must have appreciated its value." Vance's smile was charming. "Who wouldn't? It's a masterpiece. But I assure you, I was in my room by 1 o'clock, sound asleep." "Alone?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Vance's smile faltered. "Of course." Count Rostov was next, his demeanour cool and composed. "I retired early, Monsieur Poirot. Diplomacy is exhausting, and I had no interest in lingering." Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on the Count's hands, steady and unmarked. Hands that could wield a lockpick as easily as a pen. As Japp took over to collect formal statements, Poirot stepped aside with Hastings. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings whispered. "A professional thief, slipping in and out?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But the bracelet, it was not taken by chance. This was planned, Hastings. The thief knew the house, the habits, the locks, and the guest." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "They hide more than they reveal." The morning wore on, with Poirot moving between the guests and the staff, his questions precise yet disarming. He learned that Ellen, the maid, had been near Lady Harrington's room late at night, delivering linens. Grayson, the butler, admitted to checking the house's locks at midnight, but saw nothing amiss. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, was adamant that no stranger could have entered unnoticed. By midday, Poirot stood alone in the bedroom, staring at the empty jewellery box. The room was silent, save for the distant murmur of voices below. He closed his eyes, letting the facts arrange themselves in his mind. The locked box, the secure room, the guests with their secrets, and the bracelet's allure. It was a puzzle, and Poirot relished it. As he rejoined Hastings and Japp, a scream echoed from the gardens. Rushing outside, they found Clara, pale and trembling, pointing to a flower bed. There, half buried in the soil, was a single, Sulga turquoise bead, glinting in the sunlight. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers carefully retrieving it. "A clue," he said softly, "or a taunt." The mystery had deepened, and Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation. Chapter 3. Suspects in the Shadows. The late morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Harrington Hall's library, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled walls. Hercule Poirot stood by a towering bookshelf, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man unravelling a knot. The discovery of the turquoise bead in the garden had electrified the household, and the air now thrummed with suspicion. Chief Inspector Japp, pacing near the fireplace, muttered about calling in more constables, while Captain Hastings hovered nearby, his honest face creased with worry. The guests, summoned once more to the library, sat in a tense semicircle, their expressions a gallery of unease, defiance, and carefully masked guilt. Poirot's voice cut through the silence, soft yet commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the bead found in the garden is a thread in the tapestry of this crime. It tells us the thief was careless, or wishes us to think so. Now, we must examine the motives and opportunities of those present last night. Each of you, I observe, has a story. Let us see which stories hold truth. He began with Clara Winthrop, whose pale face seemed even more drawn under the library's dim light. Mademoiselle Winthrop, Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. Your aunt's bracelet is a treasure, non? And yet your demeanour last night suggested discontent. Perhaps you felt the bracelet should belong to you. Clara's eyes flashed, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. That's absurd, Monsieur Poirot. I'm grateful to Aunt Evelyn, always have been. I was in my room by 11, as I said. Her voice trembled, but Poirot noted the way her gaze darted to Peter Langley, the journalist, who sat across the room, his notebook now closed. Poirot turned to Langley next, his moustache twitching slightly. Monsieur Langley, you are a man of words, a seeker of stories. A jewel like the turquoise bracelet would make a fine headline, would it not? And your late-night writing, it placed you near Madame Harrington's room. Did you perhaps see something you have not shared? Langley's jaw tightened, his boyish charm replaced by a flicker of unease. I told you. I was working. I didn't see anything or anyone. I'm not in the habit of sneaking around. His defiance was undercut by a nervous glance at Clara, which Poirot filed away for later. Moving to Julian Vance, the art dealer, Poirot's tone became almost conversational. Monsieur Vance, your expertise in antiquities is renowned. A bracelet of such historical value must have fascinated you. Perhaps you examined it closely last night, or later, in the quiet hours. Vance leaned back in Chichotgux, his chair, his smile as polished as the library's mahogany. I admired it, of course. Who wouldn't? But steal it? I'm a businessman, not a thief. I was asleep by 1, as I said. His voice was smooth, but Poirot caught the slight clench of his fist, a crack in his composure. Count Victor Rostov stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the light. Poirot approached him with care, sensing a man accustomed to control. Count Rostov, you are a diplomat, a man of discretion. Yet your interest in the bracelet last night was restrained. Perhaps you know more of its value than you admit, or of those who might covet it. Rostov's eyes, cold and unyielding, met Poirot's. I have no interest in trinkets, Monsieur Poirot. My concerns are political, not personal. I retired early and saw nothing. His tone was clipped, his accent lending an edge to his words. Poirot noted the absence of warmth, the precision of a man guarding secrets. Sir Reginald Blake, the retired banker, coughed nervously as Poirot's gaze fell on him. Sir Reginald, your passion for gambling is well known. A jewel like the bracelet could settle many debts, no? Where were you after midnight? Sir Reginald's florid face reddened further. In the library, smoking a cigar, alone. I didn't touch the blasted thing. His bluster was unconvincing, and Poirot's eyes narrowed, sensing a man on the edge of financial ruin. Mrs. Lavinia Trent, the society matron, fanned herself with a lace handkerchief, her diamond earrings glinting. Madame Trent, Poirot said, your knowledge of society's secrets is unmatched. Did you hear whispers last night of envy or ambition? Or perhaps you saw someone near Madame Harrington's room? Mrs. Trent's lips pursed. I saw nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I was in my room by 10, nursing a headache. As for gossip, I don't deal in it. Her denial was too quick, and Poirot noted the way her eyes flicked toward Clara, a spark of malice in them. As Poirot concluded his initial questioning, Japp stepped forward, his notebook open. "Right. We'll need formal alibis and a search of the rooms. No one's above suspicion." The guests bristled, but Poirot raised a hand. "A moment, Chief Inspector. The search, it is necessary, but let us also consider the bead. It was found in the garden, near the path to the guest wing. Someone passed that way, perhaps in haste. We must reconstruct the night." Poirot requested the staff's presence, and Grayson, Ellen, and Mrs. Poole entered, their faces a mix of deference and apprehension. He questioned them methodically. Grayson confirmed locking the house at midnight with no signs of forced entry. Ellen, the maid, admitted to delivering linens near Lady Harrington's room at 11:30, but insisted she saw no one. Mrs. Poole, her voice firm, swore the household was secure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Returning to the guests, Poirot paced, slowly, his polished shoes silent on the rug. "The thief," he said, "knew the house. The bead suggests a hurried escape, yet the locked jewellery box suggests precision. We have a paradox, mes amis, and paradoxes, they reveal the truth." Hastings, leaning close, whispered, "What's your theory, Poirot? An inside job?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Theories, Hastings, are like cards in a game. One does not play them too soon. But I observe this. Envy, greed, and secrets are in abundance here. The bracelet is not merely a jewel, it is a mirror, reflecting the desires of those who saw it." As the group dispersed for lunch, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the alibis. Clara's nervousness, Langley's evasiveness, Vance's calculated charm, Rostov's cold detachment, Sir Reginald's desperation, and Mrs. Trent's sharp-eyed silence, each was a piece of the puzzle. The bead, he suspected, was no accident. It was a clue, or perhaps a distraction, left by a mind as cunning as his own. Stepping into the hall, Poirot caught sight of Clara slipping into the conservatory, her movements furtive. He followed at a distance, his steps silent. Through the glass doors, he saw her speaking in low tones to Langley, their heads close together. A lover's quarrel? A conspiracy? Poirot's little grey cells hummed, sensing a thread to pull. The mystery of the turquoise bracelet was deepening, and Poirot knew the shadows held more secrets yet to be uncovered. Chapter 4. Clues from the Past. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Harrington Hall's study, casting a golden glow over the leather-bound volumes lining the walls. Hercule Poirot sat at a heavy oak desk, his small hands folded neatly, his dark eyes fixed on a single turquoise bead resting on a velvet cloth before him. The bead, recovered from the garden, was a tantalizing fragment of the stolen bracelet, its vibrant hue a silent witness to the crime. Chief Inspector Japp had retreated to coordinate a search of the guest rooms, while Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, fidgeting with a paperweight. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under the watchful eye of a constable, awaited Poirot's next move. But the detective's mind was elsewhere, drawn to the bracelet's history, a history he suspected held the key to its theft. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've been staring at that bead for ages. Surely it's just a bit of the bracelet, dropped by the thief in a rush." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mon ami, nothing in a mystery is just anything. This bead, it is a clue, yes, but also a question. Why was it left behind? And what is the story of the bracelet itself? To catch a thief, we must understand what they stole." He had requested Lady Evelyn Harrington join him in the study, and she entered now, her sapphire gown replaced by a sombre grey dress, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, seating herself across from him. "Have you made progress? That bead, does it mean the bracelet is destroyed?" "Not destroyed, madame," Poirot replied, his voice soothing yet precise. "But its story, I believe, is the heart of this affair. Tell me, if you please, all you know of the bracelet's origins." Lady Harrington sighed, her fingers brushing the empty spot on her wrist, where the bracelet had gleamed the previous night. "It came from an auction in Cairo last year, as I mentioned. A private sale, very exclusive. The seller was an antiquities dealer, a Mr. Khalil, who claimed it was crafted for an Egyptian princess of the 18th dynasty, around 1400 BC. He said it was unearthed in a tomb near Luxor, passed through noble families, and eventually surfaced in Europe after the Napoleonic Wars. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the curse, madame? You spoke of it lightly last night, but I sense there is more." She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the bead. "Just rumours, really. Mr. Khalil warned that the bracelet carried a curse. Misfortune to those who wore it without the blessing of the gods. He was dramatic about it, but I thought it was merely a sales tactic to drive up the price. I paid a fortune, nearly £50,000, but it was worth every penny for its beauty and history." £50,000, Poirot repeated softly, his mind cataloguing the figure. "A sum to inspire envy, no? And were there others at the auction who coveted it?" Lady Harrington nodded. "Oh, yes. A French collector, Madame Dubois, was furious when I outbid her. And there was a man, a Russian, I think, who seemed desperate to have it. Mr. Khalil mentioned he represented a private buyer, but I never learned who." Poirot's interest sharpened at the mention of a Russian. Count Victor Rostov's impassive face flashed in his mind. "This Russian, madame, did he give a name?" "No, but Mr. Khalil called him the Count. I assumed it was a title, not a name." She frowned, as if recalling something unsettling. "He was intense, watched me closely after the auction." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "And the bracelet's journey after the auction, it came directly to you?" "Yes, via a secure courier. But there was an incident in Cairo, a break-in at Mr. Khalil's shop the night after the sale. Nothing was taken, but he was shaken. He hinted that the bracelet had enemies, though I thought he was being theatrical." Poirot's little grey cells were humming. A cursed bracelet, a desperate Russian, a break-in. The threads were weaving a complex pattern. He excused Lady Harrington and turned to Hastings. "We must learn more of this auction, Hastings. The past, it clings to this jewel like dust to a mirror." With Japp's permission, Poirot telephoned his contact at Scotland Yard's International Division, a discreet man named Mr. Fowler, who promised to inquire about the Cairo auction and Mr. Khalil. While awaiting a response, Poirot requested access to Lady Harrington's personal papers, hoping to find correspondence related to the purchase. She provided a folder of letters, and Poirot pored over them, his keen eyes scanning for clues. One letter, dated a month after the auction, caught his attention. It was from Mr. Khalil, written in elegant but urgent script. "My lady, I implore you to guard the bracelet with utmost care. There are those who believe it belongs to them by right, descendants of its ancient owners. They will stop at nothing." The letter ended abruptly, with no further explanation. Poirot's brow furrowed. Descendants? A claim of ownership? The plot thickened. He next turned his attention to the guests, summoning Julian Vance, the art dealer, to the study. Vance entered with his usual charm, but Poirot sensed a guarded edge. "Monsieur Vance," Poirot began, "you are a man of antiquities. Tell me, what do you know of the turquoise bracelet's provenance?" Vance's smile was measured. Only what Lady Harrington shared last night. Egyptian, ancient, exquisite. I've seen similar pieces in private collections, but this one's unique. The turquoise is of exceptional quality, likely from the Sinai mines. His tone was professional, but Poirot detected a flicker of excitement, as if the bracelet held personal significance. "And have you heard of a curse attached to it?" Poirot pressed, watching Vance closely. Vance laughed lightly. "Curses are for storybooks, Monsieur Poirot, but every valuable artifact has its legends. They add to the mystique and the price." His eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment the charm slipped, revealing a calculating intensity. Poirot dismissed Vance and called for Count Rostov. The diplomat entered, his posture rigid, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Count Rostov," Poirot said, "you were in Cairo last year, were you not? At an auction, perhaps?" Rostov's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. "I travel often, Monsieur Poirot. Cairo is a frequent stop, but auctions? I have little time for such pursuits." His denial was smooth, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw, a telltale sign of discomfort. As Rostov left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The Count, he knows more than he says. And Vance, he speaks of the bracelet with the hunger of a collector. We must dig deeper, mon ami." The telephone rang, and Mr. Fowler's voice crackled through. "Poirot, the auction checks out. Khalil's a reputable dealer, but he's vanished since last year. Rumors of a Russian syndicate chasing Egyptian artifacts surfaced around the same time. And that curse. Local gossip in Cairo links it to a family claiming descent from the pharaohs, though no one's confirmed it." Poirot thanked Fowler and hung up, his mind racing. A Russian syndicate, a vanished dealer, a family with a claim. The bracelet was no mere jewel. It was a magnet for ambition and vengeance. As he stepped into the hall, he caught sight of Clara Winthrop lingering near the staircase, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously. She clutched a letter, quickly tucking it into her sleeve when she saw him. The past was speaking, and Poirot was listening. The turquoise bracelet story was far from over. Chapter 5. The Midnight Rendezvous. The moon hung low over Harrington Hall, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the manicured gardens. Hercule Poirot stood by an open window in the library, the cool night air brushing against his face as he listened to the distant hoot of an owl. It was nearing midnight on the second day of the investigation, and the household was restless, the theft of the turquoise bracelet weighing heavily on all. Poirot, however, was not one to sleep when a mystery beckoned. His little grey cells were alert, spurred by the day's discoveries, the bead in the garden, the bracelet's ancient origins, and the cryptic letter from Mr. Khalil hinting at a family claiming ownership. Now, a new thread had emerged, a whispered conversation overheard in the gardens, one that promised to unravel the tangle of secrets. Earlier that evening, Poirot had taken a solitary walk through the estate's grounds, ostensibly to clear his mind. In truth, he was observing, his sharp eyes catching every detail. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the rustle of leaves, the faint glow of a cigarette in the darkness. It was then, near the rose arbour, that he heard voices. Low, urgent and unmistakably conspiratorial. Concealed by a yew hedge, Poirot had listened as two figures spoke in hushed tones, their words fragmented but revealing. "You're playing a dangerous game," one voice said, male and clipped. Peter Langley, the journalist, Poirot was certain. "If she finds out, it's over for both of us." "She won't," replied a woman, her tone sharp yet nervous. "Clara Winthrop." "But you need to keep your mouth shut. No more notes." The exchange ended abruptly, and Poirot had retreated before they could spot him. Now back in the library, he pondered the implications. A secret between Clara and Langley? Blackmail, perhaps? Or something deeper, tied to the bracelet's theft? The letter Clara had hidden in her sleeve earlier that day suggested she was concealing more than nerves. Poirot turned from the window, his polished shoes silent on the rug, and consulted his pocket watch. It was time to act. He had informed Captain Hastings and Chief Inspector Japp of his plan to keep watch tonight, suspecting the garden might yield further clues. Japp, sceptical but trusting Poirot's instincts, had agreed to station a constable near the house, while Hastings, ever eager, insisted on joining the vigil. "If there's a rendezvous, Poirot, I want to see it," he'd said, his eyes alight with excitement. The two men now stood in the shadows of the conservatory, its glass walls offering a clear view of the garden path. Hastings shivered in his overcoat, clutching a flashlight. "Dash it, Poirot! It's freezing. Are you sure about this?" "Patience, mon ami," Poirot whispered, his voice barely audible. "The night, it reveals what the day conceals. We wait." Minutes ticked by, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves. Then a figure emerged from the guest wing, moving swiftly along the path. Poirot's eyes narrowed. It was Clara, her silhouette unmistakable in a dark cloak. She paused near the arbour, glancing around nervously. Moments later, another figure approached, Peter Langley, his cigarette glowing faintly. Poirot gestured for Hastings to remain still, his own breath steady despite the thrill of discovery. "You're late," Clara hissed, her voice carrying in the still air. "Did anyone see you?" "No," Langley replied, his tone sharp. "But this is madness, Clara. If Rostov finds out we know, he'll—" "Keep your voice down," Clara snapped. "He won't know unless you slip up. The bracelet's gone, and we need to stick to the plan." Poirot's heart quickened. Rostov, Count Victor Rostov, the enigmatic diplomat. What did Clara and Langley know about him? And what plan? He strained to hear more, but a sudden noise, a twig snapping nearby, made the pair freeze. Clara grabbed Langley's arm, and they hurried back toward the house, their conversation cut short. Hastings started forward, but Poirot held him back. "No, Hastings, we have learned enough for now. To confront them would scatter the pieces of our puzzle." Back in the library, Poirot paced, his mind racing. "Clara and Langley, they are linked in a secret, and the Count is part of it. But is it blackmail, collusion, or fear that binds them? And the bracelet, its theft, is the key." Hastings frowned. "Blackmail, Poirot? You think they're extorting Rostov?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "Or perhaps they fear him. The Count's presence at the Cairo auction, his interest in the bracelet, it cannot be coincidence, and Clara's letter, hidden so carefully, we must see it." The next morning, Poirot requested a private meeting with Clara in the morning room. She entered warily, her pale face set in a mask of defiance. "Mademoiselle Winthrop," Poirot began, his tone gentle, "you are troubled, no? The loss of your aunt's bracelet weighs heavily, but there is more. A letter, perhaps, that you keep close?" Clara's hand instinctively moved to her sleeve, then dropped. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice tight. Poirot's smile was disarming. "Come, mademoiselle. I am Hercule Poirot. I see what others do not. The letter, may I see it? It may aid in recovering the bracelet." After a long pause, Clara relented, producing a crumpled envelope from her pocket. Poirot took it, noting the Cairo postmark and the elegant script of Mr. Khalil, the antiquities dealer. The letter was brief but chilling. "Miss Winthrop, beware the bracelet's new owner. Those who seek it believe it is theirs by blood. They know of you and will act." It was unsigned, but the implication was clear. A warning tied to the bracelet's ancient claim. Poirot's eyes met Clara's. "You knew of this danger, yet said nothing. Why?" Clara's lips trembled. "I thought it was nonsense. Aunt Evelyn dismissed the curse, and I didn't want to worry her. But then I saw him watching her, watching the bracelet." "Him?" Poirot pressed, though he suspected the answer. "Count Rostov," Clara whispered. "He was at the auction in Cairo. I was there with Aunt Evelyn, and he stared at her like he owned the bracelet already." Poirot nodded, his mind fitting pieces together. The Count, the auction the syndicate Fowler had mentioned. Rostov was no mere diplomat. But was he the thief, or merely a player in a larger game? And what of Clara and Langley's plan? As Clara left, Poirot turned to Hastings, who had entered with Japp. "The letter confirms the bracelet's past is alive, Hastings. A family, a syndicate, a curse, all converge on this jewel. And Clara, she is not merely a niece. She is a keeper of secrets, perhaps unwillingly." Japp, holding a report from the room searches, shook his head. "Nothing yet, Poirot. No bracelet, no tools, no sign of a break-in. But we found this in Vance's room. A sketch of the bracelet, detailed like he was studying it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Vance, Rostov, Clara, Langley, they circle the bracelet like moths to a flame. The midnight rendezvous has shown us a glimpse of their motives. Now, we must pull the thread further. The mystery deepened, and Poirot knew the night's secrets were only the beginning. Chapter 6. Twists in the Drawing Room. The drawing room of Harrington Hall was heavy with anticipation. Its opulent decor, gilded mirrors, velvet upholstery, and a towering marble fireplace, doing little to ease the tension among the gathered guests. It was the evening of the second day of the investigation, and Hercule Poirot had summoned everyone for what he called a little exercise of the mind. The theft of the turquoise bracelet had cast a pall over the estate, and the discovery of the bead, the cryptic letter from Cairo, and the overheard midnight rendezvous had only deepened the mystery. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small figure commanding despite its unassuming stature, his dark eyes sweeping over the assembled faces like a conductor before a symphony. Chief Inspector Japp stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression a mix of scepticism and trust in Poirot's methods. Captain Hastings, seated near a rosewood table, clutched a notebook, ready to jot down any revelations. The guests Clara Winthrop, Julian Vance, Count Victor Rostov, Sir Reginald Blake, Mrs. Lavinia Trent, and Peter Langley sat in a tense semicircle, their alibis fraying under the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. Lady Evelyn Harrington, pale but composed, occupied an armchair, her fingers nervously tracing the armrest where her bracelet once gleamed. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "the theft of the turquoise bracelet is not a simple act of greed. It is a tapestry woven of secrets, motives, and lies. Tonight we shall unravel a few threads, and perhaps the truth will begin to show itself." He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. "Let us start with the alibis. Each of you claims to have been in your rooms or elsewhere, innocent of the crime. Yet, the bracelet was taken from a locked box in a secure room. The bead in the garden suggests a hasty escape, yet the lock was untouched. A paradox, non? Let us test these alibis." Poirot turned to Clara Winthrop, whose pale face flushed under his gaze. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, You say you retired at 11, yet you were seen in the garden near midnight, speaking with Monsieur Langley. A private matter, perhaps, but one that concerns the bracelet, oui?" Clara's hands clenched. "I told you it was personal, nothing to do with the theft." Her voice was sharp, but her eyes darted to Langley, betraying her unease. Poirot raised a hand. "And yet, a letter from Mr. Khalil, found in your possession, warns of danger tied to the bracelet. You knew of a claim to it, a family believing it theirs by blood. Why did you not speak of this?" The room stirred, and Lady Harrington gasped. "Clara, is this true?" Clara's lips trembled. "I didn't want to worry you, Aunt Evelyn. It seemed like nonsense, a curse, a family. I thought it was just a story." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A story, perhaps, but one with teeth. And Monsieur Langley, you were with Mademoiselle Winthrop in the garden, discussing a plan. Care to enlighten us?" Langley shifted, his journalist's bravado faltering. "It was nothing criminal. Clara was upset about family matters. We were sorting it out." His words were vague, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his forehead. Turning to Julian Vance, Poirot's tone sharpened. "Monsieur Vance, a sketch of the bracelet was found in your room, detailed and precise. An innocent study, you claim, yet it suggests a deep interest. Perhaps you plan to sell it to a collector." Vance's smile was tight. "I'm an art dealer, Monsieur Poirot. I sketch what inspires me. The bracelet was exquisite, nothing more." His charm was intact, but Poirot caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Count Rostov, standing by the fireplace, drew Poirot's attention next. "Count Rostov, your presence at the Cairo auction, where the bracelet was sold, is no coincidence. You represented a buyer, perhaps one who believes the bracelet is theirs by right. What say you?" Rostov's face remained impassive, his voice cold. "I was in Cairo on diplomatic business. Auctions are not my concern. You have no evidence, Monsieur Poirot." His defiance was unwavering, but Poirot sensed a crack in his armour. Sir Reginald Blake, red-faced and fidgety, was next. "Sir Reginald, your debts are no secret. The bracelet's value could erase them. Your late-night cigar in the library, did it bring you near Madame Harrington's room?" "I was nowhere near it," Sir Reginald blustered. "I smoked, I slept, that's all." His indignation was loud, but Poirot noted his trembling hands. Mrs. Lavinia Trent, fanning herself, met Poirot's gaze with a haughty stare. "Madame Trent, you claim a headache kept you in your room, yet your sharp eyes miss nothing. Did you see anyone in the corridors that night?" "I saw nothing," she snapped. "I was asleep by 10. Her denial was firm, but Poirot caught the glance she shot at Clara, laced with disdain. Poirot paused, letting the tension build. Then, with a flourish, he produced a small piece of paper from his pocket. A torn receipt, found by Japp during the room searches. "This," he said, holding it aloft, "was discovered in the guest wing corridor. A receipt for a locksmith's services, dated last week, made out to an alias. Who among you visited a locksmith recently?" The room erupted in murmurs. Clara paled, Langley froze, and Vance's smile vanished. Rostov's eyes narrowed, while Sir Reginald and Mrs. Trent exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. "The lock on Madame Harrington's jewellery box was not forced, yet the bracelet was taken. Someone had a key, or the skill to make one." Japp stepped forward, brandishing the receipt. "We're checking the locksmith now, but someone here's lying. Own up, and it'll go easier." No one spoke, but the air crackled with suspicion. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, his mind cataloguing their reactions. Then he turned to Lady Harrington. "Madame, you mentioned a break-in at Mr. Khalil's shop in Cairo after the auction. Did he ever speak of others who might have keys to your box?" Lady Harrington frowned. "No, but he did say the bracelet's previous owners had replicas made, for safety. I thought it was just a precaution." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Replicas, or perhaps a means to access the real one. The plot, it thickens. As the guests dispersed, their alibis shaken, Poirot conferred with Japp and Hastings. "The receipt, it is a clue, but also a distraction," he said. "The thief wishes us to chase locksmiths, while the true method lies elsewhere. Clara and Langley's rendezvous, Rostov's past, Vance's sketch, they point to a conspiracy, not a lone act." Hastings scratched his head. "But who, Poirot? They all look guilty." "Exactly, mon ami," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "Guilt is a mask they all wear, but only one, or perhaps more, has acted. We must watch and listen, for the next move is theirs." As night fell, Poirot stood alone by the drawing-room window, the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. The turquoise bracelet was more than a jewel. It was a catalyst, exposing the hidden desires of those around it. And in the shadows, he knew the thief was watching, waiting for the next twist. Chapter 7. The Chase Through London. The fog rolled thick over London's cobbled streets, cloaking the city in a ghostly veil, as Hercule Poirot stepped out of a black taxi at the edge of Whitechapel. It was the third day of the investigation into the theft of the turquoise bracelet, and a new lead had propelled him from the opulence of Harrington Hall to the city's gritty underbelly. The morning had brought a breakthrough. A telegram from Mr. Fowler at Scotland Yard, revealing that the locksmith's receipt found in the guest wing corridor traced to a shop in East London, known to cater to less than savoury clients. The shop's owner had described a customer matching Julian Vance's description, though he used an alias. Poirot, with Captain Hastings and Chief Inspector Japp in tow, was determined to pursue this thread, sensing it could lead to the bracelet, or the thief. The street was narrow, lined with soot-stained buildings and flickering gas lamps. The locksmith's shop, a dingy storefront with a faded sign, stood between a pawnshop and a tavern. Poirot's polished shoes seemed out of place on the grimy pavement, but his focus was unwavering. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, adjusting his Homburg hat, "the city, it hides many secrets, but none can escape the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot." Japp, bundled in a heavy overcoat, grunted, "Let's hope this locksmith's got something solid. I'm tired of chasing shadows." He pushed open the shop's door, a bell jangling harshly. Inside, the air smelled of oil and metal. The locksmith, a wiry man named Mr. Cobb, looked up from his workbench, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Japp's badge. "What's this about, then?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Monsieur Cobb, you sold services to a man last week, a man who gave a false name. A tall gentleman, charming, with an interest in antiquities, perhaps. We seek information about a key or a lock connected to a theft." Cobb's face tightened, but he nodded. I remember him. Called himself Mr. Turner. Wanted a key copied delicate work, for a rosewood jewellery box. Paid extra for discretion." He hesitated, then added, "Heard him mention a meeting at the Black Raven, that tavern across the way, tonight." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A meeting, you say? Most interesting. Merci, Monsieur Cobb." He turned to Japp. "Chief Inspector, we must visit this Black Raven. The trail grows warm." Hastings, ever eager, clapped his hands. "A stakeout, Poirot? Jolly good, but it sounds dangerous." "Danger, Hastings, is merely the spice of investigation," Poirot replied, though his expression was grave. "But we must be cautious. The thief, or their accomplice, is close." The Black Raven was a dimly lit den, its air thick with tobacco smoke and the tang of cheap ale. Poirot, Japp and Hastings took a table in the corner, half hidden by shadows. Poirot's fastidious nature recoiled at the sticky tabletop, but he focused on the crowd. Dock workers, petty thieves, and shifty figures whispering over pints. Japp's plainclothes constable, stationed at the bar, signalled no sign of Vance yet. As the clock struck 9, a figure slipped through the tavern's door, tall, cloaked, and moving with purpose. Poirot's heart quickened. It wasn't Vance, but the silhouette suggested Count Victor Rostov, his angular features partially obscured by a scarf. He approached a table where a burly man in a flat cap waited, his face scarred and weathered. Poirot strained to hear their exchange, catching fragments over the tavern's din. "The bracelet's secure," the scarred man muttered, "but the buyer's getting antsy, wants it by tomorrow." Rostov's voice was low, icy. "Tell them to wait. We can't move until the heat's off. That detective's sniffing too close." Poirot's moustache twitched. The bracelet was not only stolen, but part of a larger scheme. He signalled Japp, who nodded, ready to move. But before they could act, Rostov glanced toward their table, his eyes narrowing. In an instant he bolted, shoving through the crowd toward a back exit. "After him!" Japp barked, and the chase was on. The fog swallowed Rostov as he darted into an alley, Poirot and Hastings struggling to keep pace with Japp's longer strides. The narrow lanes twisted through Whitechapel, slick with damp and littered with refuse. Poirot, despite his small stature, moved with surprising agility, his mind as sharp as his steps. "He heads for the docks," he called, noting the faint tang of river water in the air. The pursuit led to a maze of warehouses, their looming shapes barely visible in the fog. Rostov's figure darted between crates, but Japp's constable, cutting through a side alley, tackled him to the ground. A brief struggle ensued, Rostov's strength surprising for a diplomat, but Japp's handcuffs soon clicked into place. "Count Rostov," Poirot said, catching his breath, "your diplomatic immunity does not extend to theft. Where is the bracelet?" Rostov's eyes burned with defiance. "You have nothing on me, Poirot. I was meeting a contact, nothing more." Japp, panting, held up a small object retrieved from Rostov's pocket, a gold filigree clasp, unmistakably part of the turquoise bracelet. "Nothing, eh? Care to explain this?" Rostov's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot studied him, his mind racing. The clasp was damning, yet too conveniently found. A plant? A distraction? The Count was cunning, but was he the mastermind, or a pawn? Back, at Scotland Yard, Rostov was detained for questioning, but diplomatic protocols complicated matters. Poirot, Hastings and Japp returned to Harrington Hall at dawn, the clasp secured as evidence. In the library, Poirot examined it closely, its intricate design matching Lady Harrington's description. "This clasp," he said to Hastings, "it is genuine, yet its discovery is too neat. The thief wishes us to focus on Rostov, perhaps to shield another." Hastings frowned. "But Rostov was talking about the bracelet, Poirot. He's in it up to his neck." "Perhaps," Poirot mused. "But the conversation in the tavern, it was staged, no? Too clear, too direct. We are being led, Hastings, like a horse to water. And Clara Langley Vance, They remain in the shadows. Jap, nursing a cup of tea, sighed. We'll keep digging into Rostov's contacts. That scarred bloke got away, but we'll find him. What's your next move, Poirot? Poirot's eyes twinkled. We return to the heart of the matter, the motives. Rostov is a piece, but not the whole. The bracelet's history, the syndicate, the family claim, they point to a deeper conspiracy. We must watch the others closely, for the thief will move again. As they left the library, Poirot's mind churned. The chase through London had revealed a glimpse of the truth, but the turquoise bracelet remained elusive, its secrets buried in a web of deceit. The game was far from over. Chapter 8. Betrayals unveiled. The late afternoon light bathed Harrington Hall in a soft golden haze, but the atmosphere within its walls was anything but serene. The investigation into the theft of the turquoise bracelet had reached a fever pitch. With Count Victor Rostov's detention in London, and the discovery of the bracelet's clasp in his possession sending ripples of suspicion through the household. Hercule Poirot, however, remained unconvinced that the Count was the mastermind. The clasp, like the bead in the garden, felt too convenient. A breadcrumb meant to mislead. In the drawing-room, where the guests were once again gathered, Poirot prepared to pull back the curtain on the web of deceit, his little grey cells humming with the connections forged from days of observation. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his face a mix of excitement and confusion, while Chief Inspector Japp, freshly returned from Scotland Yard, leaned against the fireplace, his notebook bulging with new leads. The guests, Lady Evelyn Harrington, Clara Winthrop, Julian Vance, Sir Reginald Blake, Mrs. Lavinia Trent, and Peter Langley, sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting between Poirot and each other. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, and Poirot, standing at the room's centre, relished the tension, knowing it would force truths to surface. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant. The theft of the turquoise bracelet has revealed much about this household. Envy, ambition, and secrets long buried. The clasp found with Count Rostov suggests guilt, yet I, Hercule Poirot, am not so easily swayed. Let us examine the heart of this matter, the motives that bind you all to this jewel. He turned to Clara Winthrop, whose pale hands clutched a handkerchief. Mademoiselle Winthrop, your letter from Mr. Khalil spoke of a family claiming the bracelet by blood. You concealed this, fearing it would trouble your aunt. But was there more? A personal stake, perhaps, tied to your family's past? Clara's eyes widened, her voice trembling. I told you, it was just a warning. I didn't want Aunt Evelyn to worry. My family has nothing to do with this. Her denial was fervent, but Poirot noted the way her gaze flickered to Lady Harrington, a mix of loyalty and resentment. Lady Harrington, startled, leaned forward. Clara, what is this about our family? You've said nothing of this. Poirot raised a hand. A moment, madame. There is more. The bracelet's history, as we have learned, is tied to an ancient Egyptian lineage, a family who believes it's stolen from their ancestors. But there is another secret, closer to home. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Mademoiselle Winthrop, your mother, your aunt's sister, was once married to a man with ties to Cairo, was she not? A man who dealt in antiquities, perhaps connected to Mr. Khalil? Clara's face drained of colour. How did you know that? She stammered. Mother's first husband died years ago. It has nothing to do with the bracelet. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone gentle but unrelenting. But your mother's marriage left debts that passed to you. And the bracelet's value could erase them, no? The room gasped, and Lady Harrington's hand flew to her mouth. Clara, is this true? Are you in debt? Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's not what you think. I didn't steal it. I only wanted to protect you." Poirot turned to Peter Langley, whose nervous energy was palpable. "Monsieur Langley, your midnight rendezvous with Mademoiselle Winthrop revealed a plan. Was it to sell the bracelet to settle her debts, or perhaps to blackmail another who coveted it?" Langley shot to his feet. "That's preposterous. I'm a journalist, not a thief. Clara and I were discussing private matters." His voice faltered, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow. "Private matters that involved Count Rostov," Poirot pressed. "You spoke of him in the garden, fearing his knowledge. What hold does he have over you?" Langley sank back, silent, his eyes darting to Clara. Poirot's gaze shifted to Julian Vance, whose charm had begun to crack. "Monsieur Vance, your sketch of the bracelet suggests more than admiration. We have learned you contacted a buyer in Paris last week, offering an Egyptian treasure. Care to explain?" Vance's smile vanished. "I deal in antiquities, Poirot. Inquire about many items. It proves nothing." His voice was tight, and Poirot sensed a man cornered. Turning to Sir Reginald Blake, Poirot's tone hardened. "Sir Reginald, your gambling debts are no secret. A man in your position might see the bracelet as salvation. And Madame Trent," he continued, facing the society matron, "your gossip conceals a sharp mind. Did you overhear something that night, something you've withheld?" Sir Reginald blustered. "I've done nothing," while Mrs. Trent snapped, "I told you I was asleep." But their denials rang hollow, and Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He produced a new piece of evidence, a torn photograph found by Japp in the guest wing's waste bin. It showed a younger Lady Harrington with a man in Cairo, the bracelet on her wrist. "Madame Harrington," Poirot said, "this man, he is Clara's father, yes? A man with ties to the antiquities trade, perhaps to the very family claiming the bracelet." Lady Harrington's face crumpled. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Clara's father, my brother-in-law, was involved in questionable dealings. He died in debt, and I took Clara in. I never thought it mattered." Poirot nodded, the pieces falling into place. "The bracelet. It is a link to your family's past, a past of greed and betrayal. Someone here knew this, used it. The clasp with Rostov, the bead in the garden, they are distractions meant to obscure the true motive. Not just wealth, but vengeance." The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words sinking in. Clara sobbed quietly, and Langley reached for her hand, only to pull back under Poirot's gaze. Vance's jaw tightened, while Sir Reginald and Mrs. Trent exchanged uneasy looks. Japp, sensing the moment, stepped forward. "We're close, Poirot. Rostov's still in custody, but we've got a lead on his contact from the tavern, a smuggler tied to a Russian syndicate." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The syndicate, yes, but they are not alone. The thief is among us, hiding behind betrayal. We must set a trap, Chief Inspector, to catch them in their own web." As the guests dispersed, their secrets laid bare, Poirot conferred with Hastings and Japp. "The family connection, the debts, the syndicate, they form a pattern," he said. "Clara and Langley know more than they admit, and Vance's buyer suggests a market for the bracelet. But the true motive lies in the past, in the blood claim Khalil warned of." Hastings shook his head. "It's a mess, Poirot. Everyone's got a reason to want that bracelet." "Exactement," Poirot replied, "but only one has acted. The trap, it will reveal them." As night fell, Poirot stood alone, his mind a whirl of connections. The turquoise bracelet was a spark, igniting old wounds and hidden desires. The betrayals were unveiled, but the final act was yet to come. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The fog clung to the Thames like a shroud, muffling the distant clatter of ships and the creak of docks, as Hercule Poirot stood on a narrow pier in London's East End. It was the evening of the 4th day of the investigation into the theft of the turquoise bracelet. And the threads of the mystery: Clara's hidden debts, Langley's secretive rendezvous, Vance's sketch, Rostov's clasp, and the family secrets tied to Cairo had led to this moment. Poirot's little grey cells had woven a trap, and now, under the dim glow of a gas lamp, he awaited the thief's final move. Chief Inspector Japp, flanked by 2 constables, stood hidden behind a stack of crates, while Captain Hastings, shivering in his overcoat, crouched nearby, his eyes wide with anticipation. Poirot's plan was simple, yet ingenious. He had let slip, through a carefully staged conversation overheard by the household staff, that a buyer for the bracelet had been traced to this dockside warehouse, expecting delivery tonight. The bait was set, and Poirot was certain the thief, or their accomplice, would appear, driven by greed or desperation. The criminal mind, Hastings, he had said earlier, cannot resist the lure of opportunity, especially when they believe the game is theirs. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted doors ajar, revealing a cavernous interior stacked with barrels and crates. Poirot's polished shoes crunched on the damp gravel as he moved closer, his small figure a silhouette against the fog. He carried no weapon, only his intellect, sharp as any blade. Japp's constables had secured the perimeter, and a faint whistle signalled their readiness. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, are you sure about this? It's a rough spot for a showdown." "Certainement, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice low but firm. "The bracelet's thief is bold, but not infallible. Tonight we expose them." A soft thud echoed from the warehouse, followed by the scrape of boots. Poirot's heart quickened. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and cautious, moving toward a crate marked with a chalked symbol. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the fog. "Bonsoir. You come for the bracelet, no? But I fear the buyer is indisposed." The figure froze, then turned, revealing Julian Vance's face, his usual charm replaced by a taut expression. "Poirot," he said, his voice steady but edged with panic, "you're meddling in things you don't understand." "Do I not?" Poirot said, advancing slowly. "I understand greed, Monsieur Vance. Your sketch, your inquiries in Paris, your visit to the locksmith, they point to you, but you are not alone, I think." Vance's hand twitched toward his coat, but Japp's constables emerged, blocking his retreat. Before Poirot could press further, another figure darted from the warehouse, Peter Langley, his face pale, clutching a small bundle. "Vance, you fool!" Langley hissed. "You said this was safe!" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur Langley, you disappoint me. A journalist seeking truth, yet entangled in theft. And the bundle, is it the bracelet?" Langley hesitated, then dropped the bundle, revealing the turquoise bracelet, its stones glinting faintly. Japp lunged forward, seizing it, while the constables restrained both men. But Poirot's attention shifted as a third figure emerged from the fog. Clara Winthrop, her eyes wild with fear. "Clara!" Langley cried, struggling against the constable. "Tell them it wasn't us!" Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, your presence here is no surprise. Your debts, your rendezvous with Langley, your knowledge of the bracelet's past, they all converge. But let us hear the truth. Why did you steal it?" Clara's voice broke. "I didn't steal it. It was Vance's idea. He knew about my mother's debts, knew I'd do anything to save Aunt Evelyn from ruin. He said he'd sell the bracelet, split the money, and we'd be free. Vance laughed bitterly. Don't play innocent, Clara. You wanted it as much as I did. And Langley, your lapdog, helped forge the key. Langley's face reddened. You blackmailed me, Vance. Threatened to expose my debts unless I helped. I only got Clara involved to protect her. Poirot's moustache twitched, his mind piecing together the final threads. So, Monsieur Vance, you orchestrated the theft. You used Clara's desperation and Langley's fear, knowing the bracelet's value from your Paris buyer. The bead in the garden, the clasp with Rostov, they were distractions, to point us elsewhere. Vance smirked, but his eyes betrayed defeat. Clever Poirot. Yes, I planned it. Rostov was a convenient scapegoat. His syndicate connections made him easy to frame. I dropped the clasp in his coat during the soirée. The bead was a mistake, though. Clara's clumsiness. Clara sobbed. I didn't know he'd frame Rostov. I just wanted to save Aunt Evelyn's estate. Jap, holding the bracelet, shook his head. A fine mess. You're all under arrest. Vance for theft. Langley and Miss Winthrop as accomplices. Poirot, however, was not finished. One moment, Chief Inspector. There is another layer. Count Rostov. He was not merely a scapegoat. His presence at the Cairo auction, his syndicate ties, they suggest he too sought the bracelet, though not as the thief. Monsieur Vance, did Rostov suspect your plan? Vance's smirk faded. He was sniffing around, yes. Thought the bracelet belonged to some Russian noble family, tied to his syndicate. I used that to throw you off. Poirot nodded, satisfied. The bracelet, it is a magnet for greed and vengeance. Vance, you exploited Clara and Langley, but Rostov's pursuit was your miscalculation. He will face his own justice, but you are the heart of this crime. As the constables led Vance, Langley, and Clara away, Poirot stood with Hastings, the fog swirling around them. What a tangle, Poirot, Hastings said. Vance played them all, but Clara and Langley, they're victims too. Victims, yes, but complicit, Poirot replied. The human heart, it is swayed by desperation. The bracelet brought their weaknesses to light. Jap joined them, the bracelet secure in an evidence bag. Good work, Poirot. Rostov's being questioned, but with this lot confessing, we've got our case. Back to Harrington Hall to wrap things up? Oui, Poirot said, his eyes distant. But the story, it is not quite finished. There are explanations to be made, and a lady who must face her family's truth. The fog thickened as they left the docks. The bracelet's glow, a faint memory in the night. Poirot's mind, however, was clear, ready to tie the final knots of the mystery. Chapter 10. Resolution and Reflections. The grand drawing-room of Harrington Hall was bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light, the chandeliers dimmed, and the air heavy with the weight of recent revelations. It was the 5th day since the theft of the turquoise bracelet, and Hercule Poirot stood before the gathered household, his small figure commanding as ever, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. The bracelet, recovered from the dockside confrontation, rested on a velvet cushion on the rosewood table, its turquoise stones catching the light like fragments of an ancient sea. Lady Evelyn Harrington sat in her armchair, her face a mix of relief and sorrow, while the remaining guests, Sir Reginald Blake, Mrs. Lavinia Trent, and a subdued Count Victor Rostov, occupied the edges of the room, their roles in the drama clarified, but their consciences uneasy. Captain Hastings and Chief Inspector Japp flanked Poirot, the former with a notebook in hand, the latter clutching a final report for Scotland Yard. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. The mystery of the turquoise bracelet is resolved, but the truth, it is never simple. It is a tapestry of greed, desperation, and the shadows of the past. Allow me, Hercule Poirot, to explain how the little grey cells have unravelled this affair. He paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the parquet floor. The theft was no impulsive act. It was a plan, meticulously crafted by Monsieur Julien Vance, the art dealer whose charm concealed a ruthless ambition. He sought in the bracelet not just a jewel, but a fortune, a means to secure a buyer in Paris willing to pay handsomely for its antiquity. To execute his scheme, he exploited the vulnerabilities of others. Poirot's gaze fell on Lady Harrington. Madame, your niece, Clara Winthrop, was burdened by debts inherited from her mother's first husband, a man tied to the antiquities trade in Cairo. Vance learned of this through his own connections and used it to manipulate her. He promised to sell the bracelet, erase her debts, and secure her future. Clara, torn between loyalty to you and fear of ruin, agreed to help. Lady Harrington's eyes filled with tears. Clara, why didn't you tell me? Poirot's tone softened. She wished to protect you, madame, from the shame of her family's past. But her accomplice, Monsieur Peter Langley, the journalist, was also ensnared. Vance blackmailed him, threatening to expose his own financial troubles unless he assisted. Langley forged a key to your jewellery box, using skills from his less reputable days, and together with Clara, they stole the bracelet during the night of the soirée. Hastings, scribbling notes, looked up. But the bead in the garden, Poirot, the clasp with Rostov, how do those fit? Poirot's moustache twitched. The bead, it was Clara's error, dropped in her haste to pass the bracelet to Vance. The clasp, however, was a deliberate act by Vance to implicate Count Rostov. He slipped it into the Count's coat during the soirée. Knowing Rostov's ties to a Russian syndicate would make him a plausible suspect. Count Rostov, standing by the fireplace, stiffened. You accuse me of nothing, then? Poirot turned to him, his eyes sharp. Not of theft, Count Rostov, but of ambition. You were at the Cairo auction, representing a syndicate that believes the bracelet belongs to a Russian noble family, descendants of those who once owned it. You sought to reclaim it, legally or otherwise, but Vance used your presence to his advantage. Your meeting at the Black Raven was to track the bracelet, not to steal it, yet your secrecy made you vulnerable. Rostov's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence a grudging acknowledgement of Poirot's insight. Poirot continued, addressing the room. The receipt for the locksmith, found in the corridor, was another of Vance's distractions, meant to confuse us. The photograph of Madame Harrington with Clara's father tied the theft to a deeper motive, a family legacy tainted by greed. Vance exploited this, weaving a web of betrayal that ensnared Clara and Langley, while pointing suspicion at others. Mrs. Trent, fanning herself, spoke up. And what of us, Monsieur Poirot? Sir Reginald and I were questioned relentlessly. Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. Madame Trent, your gossip concealed no crime, but your sharp eyes missed little. You suspected Clara's distress but chose silence. Sir Reginald, your debts made you a suspect, but your cigar in the library was, indeed, innocent. The truth, it hides in the plain sight, revealed by the order and method of the mind. Japp, clearing his throat, held up the bracelet. Vance, Langley, and Miss Winthrop are in custody, charged with theft and conspiracy. Rostov's syndicate ties are being investigated, but that's for the Foreign Office. The bracelet's back where it belongs, Lady Harrington. Lady Harrington rose, her hands trembling as she took the bracelet. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I trusted Clara, and she betrayed me. But I understand her fear. What will happen to her?" Poirot's expression softened. "She will face justice, madame, but her motives were not entirely selfish. The courts may show leniency. As for the bracelet, its curse, whether real or imagined, has brought misfortune enough. Perhaps it is best locked away." As the guests dispersed, their relief tempered by the sting of exposed secrets, Poirot stood with Hastings and Japp by the window, the Thames visible in the distance. "What a case, Poirot," Hastings said, shaking his head. "Everyone had a motive, but Vance played them like a fiddle." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes distant. "The human heart, it is a labyrinth of desires, greed, loyalty, fear. The bracelet was merely a spark, igniting what lay hidden. Yet it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to bring light to such darkness." Japp chuckled. "You've done it again, Poirot. Scotland Yard owes you a pint, or a tisane in your case." Poirot's moustache curved in a faint smile. "The reward, Chief Inspector, is the order restored, the truth revealed, but a tisane, it would not be refused." As they stepped into the evening air, Poirot paused, his thoughts lingering on the bracelet's ancient origins, its journey through centuries of ambition and betrayal. The mystery was solved, but its echoes of family, loss, and human frailty would linger in his mind, a reminder of the complexities he so loved to unravel.